Hi everyone, welcome to a new episode of Understories with me, your host, Lindsay Fowler. This week, we're talking to Daisy Dier James, founder of House Law, a legal consultancy that specializes in intellectual property and trademarks for creative business. What is so incredibly fascinating about her work is how so few creative businesses understand why protecting their IP actually matters. Many of us, myself included, are generally happy to just crack on and do what we do. But to be totally honest, the idea of protecting my IP has always been kind of in the back burner. This is why people like Daisy are so amazing. They're passionate about helping creatives like you and me protect their creativity. Lastly, Daisy would want me to say, a quick disclaimer that I need to make is that nothing is on this podcast is to be considered legal advice. But if you are thinking that your IP is vulnerable, please definitely speak to Daisy. She really knows her stuff. Before we get started, if you like this podcast, please give us a rating or review wherever you're watching or listening. Tell a friend. And a little announcement, we're going to be taking a short hiatus from Understories until the new year. Don't forget to subscribe so that you get notified about future episodes. And now, over to Daisy. So Daisy, thank you for coming on Understories. It's really nice to have you. For people who don't know you or don't know what you do, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Of course. First of all, thanks so much for having me. So I'm Daisy, and I essentially am a legal consultant, but specialise specifically within intellectual property. But my company provides sort of broader services than that now. And I set up the company about, well, it was just before COVID. Literally, I think it was like March 2nd. I incorporated the business, 2020. So I sort of. Yeah, it was on hold for a little bit. But essentially, it sort of all came out because when I was at my firm in London, which was great, and I enjoyed it a lot, but it sort of very quickly dawned on me that there was this sort of gap between the companies who sort of had huge budgets for legal services and were sort of very organised and set up and had their internal legal counsel. And then there were all these incredibly interesting creative companies who I always loved working with, who didn't have internal counsel, i.e. their own lawyer. And so basically it became very quickly apparent that there was this sort of gap and there was this need for someone to almost be like a translator from like a big law firm to the end client without the internal counsel. And so that's when House Law was really born, or the idea for House Law was born. And then it's a bit of a cliche, but I had kids, moved out of London, and that was sort of the thing that pushed me to set it up. And that was, 4 years ago.
I mean, we've talked many times before, and I always think it's really interesting this because I've worked in creative companies for a long time, and I don't think I ever came across anyone thinking about IP and thinking about the real value and the intellectual property that comes with being a creative. I mean, but I think and there's quite a few of us at the moment who are like living on the fringes of creative businesses, aren't we? It's like we're offering these services that only these big companies can have,
yes,
but actually doing it for creatives. How have you found it so far we were talking about this the other day about how like it's hard to sell something that's not pretty. But how have you found it so far when it comes to selling the idea of this for your clients and for people that are interested?
Sure. So I think you made me laugh when you say that the not pretty thing, because I always have this sort of conversation of like with clients of like, what are you happy to spend? It's like, well, no one's ever happy to spend money on legals, ever.
No.
No one ever wants to spend money.
No.
And, it's much more fun to spend money on an amazing photographer and a beautiful set. But in terms of sort of the selling, I always think that I'm quite lucky in a way because I don't have to do the hard sell, because what I'm selling is actually vital for pretty much every business out there. And, everyone needs a trademark. I mean, I think unless you are using your own name for your business, and even then I would still advise you invest in a trademark. everyone should have the name of their company registered. And that's not just me saying that. That's, you just open Google and you type in, do I need a trademark? And every single person will tell you, including creative. So there's a great quote, I think, by Stella McCartney, who says, you need to know this, you need to know how to protect your business. There's lots of great brands out there. There's lots of great industry leaders who are also saying that. So I don't think it's ever been like a hard sell. It always just comes down to, yes, I know I need a trademark, but right now I also need to sell a product. And right now the photographer is charging me X and I don't have to prioritize that. So I think, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. No, it really does. I mean, I understand the same thing. Like, we get the same. It's like, for sure. It's like, why would I want to build a strategy for my business when I'm actually spending money on like hiring somebody else, or why, photography on spaces. But you said earlier, it's vital. Can you talk about why it's vital? Because this was new to me. Even someone like me who's been around.
Yeah, of course. So I think there are sort of lots of reasons, but the bottom line is really, well, I think it depends why you are doing it. And when I say why, I mean, what is your motivation for your business? So if you are building a business that you want to sell, the moment you put it out there that you want to sell, the moment someone shows an interest, they're going to look at certain things, and they're going to look at lots and lots and lots of things. But one of the things they're going to want to make sure is that the name of the company is secure. So as soon as they see that the name of the company is secure, i.e. it has been registered, they're more likely to be sort of happy to go ahead with the sale. I mean, obviously there are lots of other factors as well
that come into
play at that point, but it is one of those things that they look for. And it's the same if you're looking for external investment. But the other reason is, even if you want to be in your business forever and you don't have any intention of selling it or seeking external investment, you want to have some kind of security, I think, always, that you can continue to trade under the name you have chosen to trade under. And really the only way of doing that and securing that and sort of having that ability and that exclusivity to a name is to register as a trademark in the territories where you want to operate. And ultimately that comes down to this idea that you are building up a huge amount of goodwill with your customers in your brand, and your brand starts to sort of signify something. It is a marker of what your customers are buying into, whether that be a product or a service. And to have to suddenly change that name, or to have someone else pop up providing the same goods and or services under that name, would be not great, and there's an emotional aspect to that as well. There's an emotional thing to building up a brand name and then being told you have to change it. It can be very emotional. There's also a business element to it. So I'd say a trade, that protecting the name of your business is probably, if you do one thing, just make sure you do that one thing. Then obviously there are other bits and pieces you should be doing and thinking about, but that is the building block one, probably.
Yeah, to me, this is so interesting because I think what you were saying earlier about like, even if you're not planning on selling it, it's worth doing it, because I think you're right. It's more about the emotional connection to that brand that you've built, right? So, but yeah, even if you say, if you've named, if I named my business Lindsay Fowler Consulting, like I would still do it because obviously, but like, I think this is what's interesting is that I don't think I've come across many studios who have this on the radar. And I think that I wonder, well, I kind of know why, because it just doesn't seem like it's like, first of all, is it really going to happen? Is some other Lindsay Fowler in the world going to come and like create like a consulting firm off the bat of it? Probably not. But I think that's the thing, right? It's like, it could happen. And I think it's that undermining of that work and that, as you say, the brand that you've built. When you explain it to people, are they like, oh yeah, okay, fine, that's great, let's do it? What's the process for this? Is it you just register it online? Is it a simple form you fill out? How do you do it?
Sure. So I think, just picking up on something you just said then, I think it's the ultimate insurance policy. So, protecting the name of your business is very akin to having professional indemnity insurance or having household insurance, because you may never need it. Like you may register your name of the name of your business, and also I think an important thing to flag here is not just the name of your business. It could be the name of your products. It could be your logo. It's sort of broader than that. It could be your tagline. But and you may register it, pay the money, and never think about it or never come up ever again. And if it doesn't, that's great. Like great, because it means that good. But if you do need to rely on it, it'll be the best money you ever spent. And I think that's the way you have to look at it as well. But on your question in terms of process, I think a lot of people, well, I say a lot of people, the people who have done some reading and recognise the need to register the name of their business or a product name or tagline or logo, there can be a tendency to jump, I think, too quickly into filing the form, which is done online, depending on where you are. And I think most of your listeners are UK-based, EU-based. Yeah. So post-Brexit, slight change, you would now, to get coverage in the EU and the UK, you need an application to the UK IPO, which is the UK Intellectual Property Office, and the EU IPO, which is the European Union Intellectual Property Office. So it is really important to think about what territories you operate in, because these rights are territorial by nature, i.e. you need a registration in those territories where you're operating. But on the point around sort of the process and jumping straight in, I think it is incredibly important before you invest in these rights, which do become assets in their own right. You need to take a step back, and you need to be really careful. The top tip is to really carefully identify three things really. The first is, what mark do you want to register? Because if you're about to do a rebrand in 2 months' time, or you're going to rename the company, then there's not much point investing in it at this point. So really carefully identify what you want to register, i.e., is that logo going to change? Or, is that one going to see you through? Are you going to change the name of your company? Probably less likely. But still, so number one, identify the mark. Number two is to very, very carefully identify the classes of goods and or services you want to register the mark in. So all products, goods, services are split into 45 classes. And I don't think there's any trademark in the world registered in all 45 classes. Coca-Cola may have managed to do that. Nike may have, but I don't know the answer to that. But essentially, you need to identify those goods and services that you want to register your mark for. And when you're doing that, you do need to think long term about what you want to do in the future. So if you are currently selling bath and body products, but you think you might want to expand into candles in the next year, which is very likely, sort of easy product category expansion. Not necessarily easy, but you know what I mean. You need to be registering in class 3 and class 4. If you think, actually, I might start selling some towels to go alongside all the bath and body products, you need to be in class 24 for textiles. And what you don't want to happen is, you don't want to be in a situation where you are building a really great brand in candles and bath and body products under one name. And then you're like, well, this is such a natural progression. My customer exists in the bathroom space. It's very, very natural and normal that I can sell towels alongside candles and bath and body products. I'm going to now sell towels under my brand name. And then you call me up and we have a conversation about it, and I say, well, actually, I'm really sorry, but someone has already registered that name in class 24, so you can't. Because, well, you can, but if you do, you'll be vulnerable to trademark infringement proceedings. So being really careful in how you identify the classes of goods and services from the beginning and from the outset really pays dividends long term. So identify the mark, identify the classes of goods and services, and then identify the territories. Because again, and I think it's a really archaic system, and I think it's a system which doesn't actually work with how industry operates, especially product-based industries.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, because it's everybody can sell internationally now if you want to. So like this whole idea of territory is becoming a bit silly in that sense.
Completely. And companies become international overnight,
Yeah.
because if you have someone in Australia who follows sort of like London-based influencer who talks about a necklace, suddenly you've got a market in Australia overnight.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting conversation I have with a lot of clients. Like, well, I can't afford to register in 20 countries, but at the moment I am selling to 20 countries, but because of my Instagram marketing strategy or whatever it might be. But thinking about that international strategy from the outset, even if you can't afford to do, or you don't have the budget to do the lots of international marks, just having an eye on that from the outset can pay dividends. And I talk about it being like planning permission. So it's your planning permission to expand. Having these registrations is akin to having your planning permission to expand your house. You're expanding your business into these countries, and that increases the value of your company, and the asset that your portfolio becomes a more valuable asset. So that's sort of.
That's really, but what about, service-based companies? So, obviously I work with a lot of architects and interior designers and graphics and all that. How does that work? Because obviously, I imagine that to me, that seems very complicated, but maybe I'm overcomplicating it. I don't know. But like, if you're doing something that's not a product, you're just providing a service, then you just do it where the service is happening, right? Is that, but then, like in my case, for example, why would I trademark myself in the EU, obviously, because we're in Amsterdam, but then and probably in the UK because we work with people there.
Yeah.
But there's nothing to say that I couldn't do work in the States, but it's just a service. Why would I have to register as a consultant in the States, basically?
So I think, so if we use you as an example and the States, so let's assume you had your UK and your EU registration. If you are providing services within the UK and the EU and you are registered in the UK and the EU, then you should be fine. If you, for example, took hypothetically speaking, should the name be registered by another company in the US, but you're not actually in the US providing services, but someone in the US is accessing your services from the UK or the EU, then that should be fine. The issue is whether, is if you then went and set up an office and did like a conference or a workshop in the US and someone else was registered for those services. But then also you have to remember, and this is where you have to be quite pragmatic about these things, is that they're very unlikely to sue you because it's so expensive to bring an action, and they can only sue you for what's in the company. So, you do have to be slightly pragmatic about these things and sort of sensible approach. And that's why, really, going back to the beginning, thinking about the reason for doing it is so important, because if the reason for investing in your portfolio of registrations is because you want to sell the business, you would take a very different approach to it than if you just want a level of protection because you don't want an ex-employee thinking it's quite clever just to set up a company and register under the same name because there's nothing stopping them from doing it. Do you see what I mean? So
yeah,
I talk about the 5 W's when you do any IP strategy, which is the what, the why, the when, the where, and the who. And we basically work, it sounds very simplistic, but actually if you work through those 5 W's, you can often come out with a sort of really sensible strategy, basically for sort of making sure that the investment you're putting in is sort of proportionate to what you want out of the strategy.
Do you often get clients who are like, I'm not really sure what I want in the long term? For companies that are, they might not already know what they want to do, or they might not have any ideas of sort of their long-term plans. Like how, that must be quite a complicated question, because they're like, well, I don't know what I want. Like, am I just doing the thing that I'm doing?
Yeah, and I think that's why often there's a sort of overlap here between IP strategy, which is probably obvious, but there is an overlap between sort of the business planning and business consulting services and IP, because often these conversations move into that realm about sort of, and suddenly I'm ending up having a conversation with a client, which is very much going into commercial strategy. Which I try and sort of pull it back at that point to make sure that, but essentially it is difficult, but I think that's why you have to sort of, again, take quite a pragmatic approach and think about the costs involved in it and sort of be sensible about it. Because, and I think there's, amongst sort of the Instagram legal consulting world, there's sort of few channels that talk about this. I think there's sometimes too much scaremongering. And I think, it's, I don't think it's right necessarily to sort of don't go down that, oh my goodness, if you don't do this, you're going to be sued immediately and you're going to be so vulnerable and, you have to do this. And I think that I personally don't, it's not my style. I don't think that's the right approach. I think a pragmatic, sensible, proportionate strategy is what is sensible. But, otherwise it becomes, also it can be like crystal ball gazing because you don't know which direction the company's going to go.
Yeah.
But I think that also comes on to the subject of being overwhelmed by the subject. I think a lot of people can feel very overwhelmed by the amount of decisions to be made around all, that identifying aspect of things. And I think that as a result, sometimes the natural reaction is to actually do nothing because it's like, it's like if I talk to my accountant or like an accountant, I'm like, oh my God, it's just too much. And I bury it. So I think if you're going to avoid being overwhelmed, I think a building blocks approach is really important. And sort of not panicking and actually thinking, if I do one thing this year, if I invest in one registration this year, that's better than no registration. And then next year I can invest a little bit more, and the year after a bit more. And that's why I think, registering the name of the business is like just the key core first thing you should do. And there are other things like checking your employment contracts and making sure that, or especially if you're working with freelancers, making sure that the intellectual property is assigned to the company, i.e. that you own it as the company or as the sole trader, and not the freelancer who's done it for you. That's a sort of really...
I think that's a really interesting point, actually. I'd like to talk about that a bit more because I think for better or worse, there's a lot more freelancers in the world and a lot of more people are working with freelancers on a more as almost like a sort of a partial employer at that time, which I think is great because it gives people the freedom they want and expand and contract, etc. But I think that's a really important point to note is that they need to have a contract in place, first of all, but also that states that they license their work to because you were saying that I think the other day that it's like they still own they own the intellectual property of the work that they do as freelancers.
Yeah, so in the UK, the person who essentially puts pen to paper. So if you, to give an example, so if you hire someone to draw your logo for you, and it's a freelance arrangement, unless there is paperwork in place that says otherwise, the default position is that the person who put pen to paper, i.e. drew the logo, they would own it. So, and it's the same with someone who takes a photograph or someone who writes the copy for your website or someone who writes the copy for your newsletter. The person who does it owns it unless there is paperwork in place which transfers that ownership of that drawing, whatever it might be, from the freelancer to you. And getting that in place early on is really important. I don't like scaremongering, but I would be very rich if every time someone said to me, oh, but my friend drew it for me, so it'll be absolutely fine. I was like, that's when I'm like, tea breast. Because it may be absolutely fine. But I think, as your company becomes more successful and, tensions can arise, and it's like, oh, you're building a really successful company, you're doing really well, you're using my logo, which I drew for you over a cup of coffee. I think it's now time I got some money for that.
Didn't that happen with the woman who did the logo for Nike? Wasn't she just like Phil Knight's friend or something like that?
Yeah, I think she was. I don't know the exact specifics or the paperwork in place, but yes, I believe she was.
Yeah. Or she got paid like $50 or something for it or whatever, just like a favor. I mean, that's the thing. It's, I mean, but that's the thing is, I think that I don't think that's all really on the top of mind. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think you just think, oh yeah, this person's doing me a favor. It's like, we're friends. It'll be cool. I mean, it's a sticky one, right? Because I think it's, as you say, is there's an element of like pragmatism here, right? Because it's like, the reality of something terrible happening is probably quite low, but there's the whole thing about like that. I always kind of think about like that belts and braces mentality, not to come across so really litigious or like super like strict and, contract, and all that, but actually just to protect everybody so that everybody knows that, and you're doing it for them as well. Like, it's not just to protect you.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah. And I think, so House Law now does contract work as well. And I think something which has been really interesting about this is, and I, sometimes we'll do a short form, sort of, or literally like a form almost. But just the clarity around language can be so helpful for both my client, but also their client. So whether that's a photographer or an interior designer or a garden designer. And often, yes, the sort of structure we tend to do is sort of on the back, you have all the sort of legal stuff and all the liability stuff and indemnities and all that stuff in the back. But the first page or the first couple of pages is often it's intended to be a very easy document, i.e., anyone can pick it up and read it, like an idiot proof. But actually, it's really interesting the conversations that come up out of preparing that document around process and clarity, and just having that clarity is so helpful. And again, the chances of the client going to court over one of these agreements is incredibly low. But it's just the ability to be able to say to a client, i.e. my client's client, the end client, so to speak, well, actually, no, because we went through this document and it's very clearly stated here that you will pay me on the 1st of May and the 1st of June. That's what we agreed. And having that clarity can just be so helpful for everyone involved, and saves so much time in the long run. But it also provides clarity for the whole organisation, i.e. my client's organisation, because everyone within that organisation, they're all singing from the same hymn sheet. They're all literally singing from the same contract. And they're like, oh, okay, so that's how we're going to follow the process. Or, oh, okay, so we're going to send a quote first, or no, rate card first, then they're going to look at that, then they're going to look at the quote, then we'll agree the quote, then we'll send the contract. And then it makes it just very smooth.
It also takes the mental load. It makes the mental load lower, doesn't it? Because if you just have these sort of repeatable things, everybody knows what they're doing and they don't have to ask any questions. No meetings need to happen. No, not even any conversations need to happen because it's just, they're articulated.
Yeah.
It's really interesting.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a bit about house law as well, because I think it's really interesting, to do this, to sort of take that leap. Why did you, first of all, what was the motivation for getting into law for you?
Okay. So, I guess getting into law full stop was probably my mother, was probably the motivation. So she, much cleverer than me, and she read law at Cambridge. I did geography at Oxford. She did a proper subject at university.
Hey, I'm an art history major. I'm with you on this one. Liberal arts degrees are the best.
Yeah, exactly. And then she went off to have a career. I think she was called to the bar, so like in the UK, she can be a barrister, i.e. fight in court. But then she went off and she did all sorts of other things, a lot in sports marketing. But there was always this sense that she was always a bit embarrassed by it. But this idea, she's a lawyer, even though she'd never really practiced. And it just opened so many doors to so many different things. And so for me, it was this idea that, I did geography at Oxford, and then I was like, I'm going to do law conversion, but then I was so bored of exams afterwards, and I ended up going to work for JWT on like an internship, the ad agency. And then I was like, actually, no, I do want to do the law thing. So then I went back to law school, did the conversion, which is very popular in the UK. Actually, some firms actually prefer you to take that route. And then I trained. But the idea was really that it would be like something in my toolbox, which I could then use in whatever career I chose, if that makes sense. It was never really the intention, I don't think, to like always practice law. But then I ended up at this firm called Bird and Bird, which I loved, and I had an incredible time there and incredible training. And I actually initially looked at them because they have a big sports practice and I wanted to do sports law, but then I not actually, I did a seat with them and I wasn't that keen on it. So I ended up loving the IP department at Bird and Bird, which is like a world-leading department full of the most incredible people and like super lovely, super friendly, but incredibly good at what they did. And I really enjoyed it. So I ended up basically qualifying into the IP department. And then I just really enjoyed it and really liked it. And actually, so then here I am still doing it. But
what do you like about IP? What do you like about IP law so much?
Well, I like it because I like doing what I do now because of the clients I get to talk to and work with, and their sort of the sort of branding element to it and the design element to it. Because a big part of my practice is protecting designs, and I love design. But I'm not a creative. I couldn't design something myself. I've tried many times. But I love design, and so and the fashion industry. I wanted Vogue, and so I guess doing intellectual property and doing trademarks and design protection kind of ticks those different boxes. I like strategy. There's a lot of strategy involved in it, and I like design. And at the moment, it wasn't necessarily this way at Bird and Bird, but at the moment, I get to just work with the most incredible people. A lot of them being women, but who have set up the most incredible businesses. And I find that really inspirational. So that's kind of, I guess.
That's amazing. And so you've been doing house law for 4 years now, since the pandemic. I love that you started like 10 days before lockdown. I started in like July of 2020. I mean, like there's so many people who had these like weird lockdown businesses that just started, and some of us are still going. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
What's been the most, like, since you've been going now, like what's been some of those like the most surprising things that have happened since you've started?
Surprising things. I guess I'm not sure really what's surprise. I mean, I guess it's a surprise to me how I've managed to make it work. In the sense of like how popular it is has been really surprising. Because
what do you attribute that? What do you attribute that to?
I don't know. I think my fees are incredibly accessible, for want of a better phrase. And I think that makes it work. And I think, we had this conversation. I think it can be quite difficult setting up by yourself. And so you can have a really bad couple of weeks, and you're like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have to find a proper job, and this is not going to work.
Yeah.
And then, but it's always just for a week or so. You're like, oh goodness. And then suddenly you'll get like 3 new clients, and then in a week, and you'll be like, oh great, we're good again. So that's nice, and I think I've got better at dealing with that slight roller coaster and uncertainty. But I don't know if there's any sort of.
Did you ever expect to do your own firm in this sense? I mean, was this ever like an idea that you wanted to sort of come to fruition?
Yeah, I never expected to have my own firm. I always expected to have my own business. So I always, since I was very young, I've sort of done business projects and started businesses or started selling like lived in India for a bit, and I started selling handbags, and I'm always, I set up the charity fashion show at Oxford, and I've always been setting things up, or like I set up the school newspaper at my school didn't have a newspaper, I set that up. So I've always been like that, but I never thought it would be in law. I thought it would be in something else. But actually, it's kind of worked perfectly. But like I said, because I get to work with amazing creative people, which I love, and I get to sort of, I guess, bring something to the table, so it feels like I'm actually contributing. That I really like that aspect of it, I guess.
If you had known like the challenges that it would be to set up your own thing, would you have done it?
Yeah, I would have done it. I mean, I think, I grew up with a father who worked from home most of the time. And so that was sort of modeled to me, this idea of like working from home and being able to be a very present parent. So ultimately I do it this way because I want to pick my kids up from school. So, and this is how I do it. And I want to go to every Mother's Day service, and I want to go to every Sports Day service. And so, that's what motivates me the most, I guess, is that I want to be present and at home.
There is something about this, I think, that, well, it's about building the business that's like right for you and your lifestyle. Yes. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder more and more about this because I think sometimes, I struggle with this myself. It's like, I feel like I should be doing things a certain way, or I should be like, hustling constantly or caning it all the time and blah, 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 blah. And it's so strange to be like, no, this is what I'm going to do, like, because I need it to have that flexibility, or because when I've had my own wobbles and being like, oh, I don't know if I can do this anymore, I'll like look at jobs online and like for people, and I'm like, oh God, the idea of going back and having to like work in an office or have set hours or lose that flexibility. You're right. It is probably the main motivator ultimately.
Yeah. And I think, we have discussed this topic, but, I think it's also once you've worked for yourself, it's quite hard and have complete control over the company, which can be a bad thing. And actually, you have to be really careful of not being too blinkered and actually thinking, oh, what could I have done better? Because you don't have the same checks and balances if you're in a big organization, right? But I think it'd be quite difficult to go back and work for someone else after doing what we've done.
Yeah. We're ruined. Daisy, we're ruined.
We're ruined.
We have to make it work.
I also think it's, I could talk about the sort of working mother angle all day because I find it fascinating. And I think that I think law firms get a really bad rap, not necessarily fairly, because like the firm I was at I can't speak for this now, but when I left 4 years ago, they were pretty incredible in the way that they treated me. I had some illness issues. They were phenomenal. They looked after me really well. When I was pregnant, they looked after me really well. When I went back, I was pregnant again, which was not planned, but I was, after I went. They were phenomenal, the way they looked after me. So I can't complain about that. I'm sure there are firms who it's very difficult to work for as a working mother, but my experience at my firm was pretty great. And I think there are, I spoke to a friend the other day, and she said, she wanted something where she could very much, go in, do her work, leave, and not really think about it when she was with her kids. But she was committed to going in on those particular hours. And for me, that doesn't work for me. But I've been really thinking about what she was saying because I'm always thinking about the business. So I think about the business in school run, and I think about the business when I'm making dinner for the kids, and I think about the business when I played it. I'm always thinking about it. And actually so I think there are swings and roundabouts to the different approaches you take to being a working mum. I think the most important thing is that you do it if you love it, you work, and you make it work. You design it in such a way that it works for your family and what you want to achieve.
Yeah. It's true though, isn't it? It's like I used to say when I wasn't doing this when my daughter was little, but like I remember when I always kind of had this strange guilt between feeling guilty when I was at work because I felt like I was kind of somehow leaving her behind. And then when I was with her, I felt guilty for not being at work. But this arrangement that I've come up with seems to be the best because it's like I can do the both. And obviously she's older, it's a school and all that kind of stuff. It's different. But I think like, but also I think we were talking about this as well, as like there's the mental joy of thinking about it.
Yes.
And also the huge stress of it, but like but there's like that kind of, you like strategy, and I'm the same. It's like we like thinking through like what we're going to be doing and why we're going to be doing it, and it keeps our brains going. It keeps our brains energized. I don't know if I could do a job where I just went in and just worked my hours and went home. I mean, it kind of would be nice, but I don't think I could do that.
No, I don't think it would suit me, but it has made me think about sort of trying to. And I was really hypocritical because I have a go at my husband about this and say, you have to be able to compartmentalize. So if you've had a bad day, when you walk in the door, you've got to like, it's not the kids' fault you've had a bad day, or like, the kids still want to talk to you even if you need to do your emails or whatever it is. So, but I think maybe I need to get a bit better at that in sort of like compartmentalizing and being maybe a bit more sort of, but it is difficult because
well, it's all consuming, isn't it?
And if I don't think about the business, then the business will fail because there's no one else thinking about getting new clients, and there's no one else thinking about paying the back bill, and there's no one else thinking about an IP
all of it, every single thing, everything.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've got a question here. Is like, how, what are some of the bigger challenges that you faced since you've started, and how have you overcome them?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge, I think fees is always the big challenge. Like what to charge is a big challenge. I know I'm too cheap. I know my rates are not high enough, and I think actually that can work against you if they're not high enough, because I think people can think, well, that's too good to be true, or she's obviously not very good at what she does if that's what she's charging. But I think there's also, would I have landed or sort of secured the clients I've landed if I had gone in, too high? So I think setting the prices is always a challenge, and sort of not being a busy fool is, you have to sort of, but again, I think some of that, I don't know what your experience is with this, but I think some of that comes from sort of, sort of slowly you build the company, slowly you build your reputation. And I think people can be way too obsessed with money when they set up their business. And I think, there's so much more to it than that, like building good reputation, having good clients, having the type of clients who will champion you. There's so much more to it than just what your hourly rate is. Oh
my God. Yeah, I think that is really true. I was having a conversation with someone earlier today about this, and I've come across this a little bit, where it's like they've invested in sort of brand promotion, but they're very young businesses. And it's almost like they've from a brand perspective, they've grown and they've put themselves at this level, but actually from a business perspective, they actually are still lagging behind. And there's it puts a real place of limbo, because they want to be charging these rates that this quote unquote, this reputation stuff brings them, but actually they're not there yet. And that is, I think you're right. I think every year, I think when you're starting out, you have to be cheap. I think that's because you're trying to work out who you want to work with. You're trying to work out what you do, like what your service actually is, especially when you're doing more like what we do. But it's like, but then every year you get better, and every year you get more information, and every year you learn more and you can bring more value. And so it's really about making sure that you keep going up. But I always say to people, like, there's always, you have to know your floor, but there is no ceiling. But you'll get pushback when you start getting closer to it,
Exactly.
So, but it is hard though, because I think also, I mean, I would say that you are creative doing this. You know what I mean? I think that what you're doing is you're bringing an element of creativity to it that I mean, I know you say you're not creative, but I'm 100% sure you are. I think everybody is, to be fair. But I think there is something about that. It's like, it's kind of tricky to kind of put a price on that. It feels a little weird. Like
it is. It's tricky. It's tricky to put a price on it, and it's tricky to because my offering is very different from a big city firm. So my I'm always sort of thinking, well, if my prices are too high, then they might, even I would say to them, you should go to a firm where there's 100 people who are all there, can provide you with all different, do you know what I mean? So I think you have to show humility. You have to have an element of humility, and I think when you start getting more and more clients all the time, you have to remember that you can't run before you can walk, and there are it's sort of without going into too much information, which I probably shouldn't.
But I mean, it's a good.
It's so easy just to think we're having a little coffee.
Don't worry, it's not live. We can edit it out.
No, but also the point of house law, the very point of house law is to make these services accessible to more business, to creative businesses. So, and I don't, and a lot of my clients, they'll sell in like Selfridges or Harrods or Liberty, they're selling, or they'll be featured in Vogue as or House and Garden, or or wallpaper. But that doesn't mean that they have huge legal budgets. And I think that's the kind of basically the type of client that I've landed on. They've landed on me. It's sort of a perfect marriage, really, between, and a lot of them will be 5 years into their journey, 5 to 7 years. It's that kind of sweet spot, 5 to 7 years, when you're like, oh, like this wasn't meant to be a business, and now it is a business, and I now need to get everything in order. So I have clients like that, and I have other clients who are actually sort of very sophisticated, or they've come from other businesses where IP has been an issue, so they know they want to put it in place. And I guess that's something which is just something I find really interesting. It's sort of the motivations of clients, and how some clients, in the morning I can have a conversation with a client who's almost in tears because something has been copied. And in the afternoon I can have a conversation with a client where it's like a direct copy and they just don't care. And it's very interesting how people have completely different emotional reactions to copying, and I find that bit really interesting.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because like I was thinking about what you're saying just now about the people that need stuff that you and I do the most are often the people that are like, they don't have the budgets for these things. So I think that's the challenge, right? Is like, how do you find, because then it's like an element of scalability, right? Because there's only one of you, but it's like, how do you, because you have to price it at a point where it makes it financially sustainable for you to do it. But then it's like, how do you make it financially affordable for the people who need it the most? This is, I mean, I haven't come up with the conclusion for this. I don't really know, because it's like, you're kind of dealing with two opposing forces in a sense. But I'm with you. It's like when you work with people that are like, it's like the clients that you get to work with, they're so inspiring and so interesting, and yet they range in what matters to them and why they come to you in the first place. I have some people who come like, yeah, I want to sell this thing. I'm going to get out of it. I'm going to do it. And then someone's like, I'm going to sell it. Never going to sell this. It's when I die, the studio dies. And it's like, but ultimately they're both trying to build something that's right for them. Right. So I guess it's the same kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, and that's where I think house law can offer a sort of level of flexibility that a traditional law firm can't. And again, like a bit like I don't like the people who scaremonger. I also don't like the people who say, oh, big law firms are banks. I don't think they're banks. Like they have massive overheads, but also they have extreme expertise. And sometimes you need to call that in. And I do regularly for my clients, because I'm, and this is the point, I operate as a consultancy, not as a law firm. So what I like also about that is it affords me, I think, a little bit more flexibility in terms of those sort of pragmatic strategy decisions, more so than sort of, this is the sort of letter of the law and this is the legal advice. Because obviously the legal advice, I should say, nothing in this podcast is legal, because should be considered legal advice. It's all guidance.
Legal disclaimer.
Yes, disclaimer. But obviously, the legal advice is you register your trademark in X number of classes, blah, blah, blah. That's legal advice. The consultancy advice, or the sort of pragmatic approach, is, well, that is your budget. Your budget is £500, so you can only afford one class. What is your key core class? Okay, let's register in that class.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean? And I think that nuance is really important, and it allows me to be a bit more commercial. And
I think you're right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because also talking about going, like what you're saying about the building blocks, is like it actually is working with them with where they're at, and it's like being, as opposed to being like going to a big city firm or whatever, just getting all the bells and whistles. It's like, okay, actually I just need this one thing. Okay, great, let's just do this one thing, and then you do that work, and then the next thing comes along and be like, right, let's do this next thing. And it's just about like sort of a gradual unfolding of all the protections and all the things that should be in place, as opposed to just dumping it.
Exactly. And I think where house law sits quite nicely as a hybrid there is that there are websites online where you can go and you can enter your mark, and then I think it spits out, I've never used it, but I think it then spits out an application, and then, but the problem with that is you don't have anyone saying to you, well, have you thought about the fact that actually you're in these classes, and have you thought about the fact that actually there's this other registration and that's going to cause you an issue? Have you thought about the fact that you might be, if you file an international in 6 months of your UK application, you can claim priority. Have you thought about those things? And so I think that's where house law is a really nice hybrid, where you do get kind of like pragmatic, what can you afford? Let's do what you can afford. But you also get it with a kind of like one eye on, oh, well, okay, but just think about this or think about that.
Yeah.
So it is.
It's much more holistic. It's like less like tunnel visioned. Because I mean, with the law, like lawyers I've worked with in the past in architecture, it's like, they're great, but they're like super hyper focused. They're not thinking about any like, the relationship with the client that's a little bit touchy, or they're thinking about like how we're building the business. They're just like, this is the law, this is what you do.
Yes, exactly.
But coming at it from that view is great.
Yeah. And I think, someone once said, don't ever rely on your lawyer to give you commercial advice. And I think a lot of people do rely on that. But I think that's what house law does offer, is there is an element of commercial advice in there, and there is an element of conversations, which is sort of business plan aspect of your business.
Yeah, it's super important.
Yeah, so
yeah, it's super important.
But I enjoy that. That's quite selfish in a way, because that's that I enjoy, so that I kind of do that because I enjoy it. It's my more natural fit, I guess.
What's so exciting to see, like I think I'm probably the same in this way, is like you see what they're doing, and all of a sudden you can like jump a few years in the future, you could see all the opportunity.
Yeah.
But do you ever find that when you get into that place that you have to like kind of really pare it back because you don't want to freak them out with like the opportunity for them? You're like, well, you could do this thing, but I don't want to scare you, so let's just focus on the next 12 months and like the next 18 months.
The biggest occupational hazard of this is I end up spending a fortune on my clients' products, because I become very invested in the product, and often I just love the product, and I love how it's made, and I love the process, and I love the cottons or the shapes or the and so I think that's like I do get quite and also I sort of seek them out as well. Like if I see something I really love, I really, really, really want to work with them because I just love their XYZ.
Yeah.
What do
you do then? Do you just like reach out to them and be like, oh, I bought your product, I love it. Have you ever thought about X?
Yeah.
That's a great in. It's a great in.
Because I love design and I love beautiful things. I'm such a magpie. So it's really not even like, it's not even a heart, like it could sound really cynical. I buy their product. It's like, well, actually, no, I buy their product because I really love it. And I love working with people who create great product. So it's like, I just genuinely love it. So because I have one client who I'm like, oh my God, I bought this to my daughter. I was like, it's just so lovely. And I said, it could sound really brown nosing, but I like, it's like a genuine, it is like a genuine, interest in those things, and that
I think that's important. I mean, honestly, like I'm the same. Like I have to buy into what our clients are doing. If I don't, it's like it's really hard to get excited about how to build their business. It's like when I see with the work that I do, it's like so invigorating because I'm like, this needs to be out in the world. More people need to have access to this and see this. It's important.
It's beautiful. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's true.
And and I guess that's also there's not many I guess, city lawyers where you would end up having a massive conversation. I think one client, I once even sent them something which like I bought somewhere, which it could sound really bad because like it's exactly what I protect people against. But I bought something which was very generic.
Yeah.
It was very generic, but it had like fallen to pieces. It had worn it to death. And I literally sent them photographs. Like, you need to make something.
Yeah. I love it. You're like, it's fine. I'll figure out the IP law. It's fine. Do it something different.
Which is completely outside of my job description. There you go.
So what are your big plans for House Law? Because I think that's an interesting point, is that you're not a law firm, you're actually a consultancy. What do you want to do with it over time?
Yeah. So I think it started as Daisy Dier James Consulting, and I worked with someone who was brilliant and really instrumental in building the brand. She was like, you need to have more confidence. And actually, to be fair, my mentor at my old firm as well, who trained me, he also said to me, like, you need to have sort of more confidence in your ability and you need to offer more services. So it started off as just Dier James Consulting. I just did designs. Then I branched out to trademarks, and now I'm doing contract work as well. So I guess, and the contract work is quite new. So like we've been doing that for about 4 months, and I'm working with some great consultants who have a commercial legal background. I have a little bit, but they are real experts. And so they help me provide contracts for clients. And so I think cementing that part of the practice is probably the sort of goal for this year, expanding that out. And it would be nice to get to a point where we had full-time employees would be nice. But then on that subject, you have to sort of remember what the ethos of house law is, and a lot of it is around flexibility, being able to work from home, being able to have family and be a lawyer at the same time. So when I say employees, I think it would probably be more on a sort of freelance consulting basis rather than having someone, who was expected to work. But yeah, expanding the number of people who are sort of consulting house law is probably sort of the goal, really, for the next 18 months.
What would be your ideal bit of your job that you would do if you say you brought in people to help support you and do all this stuff? What would be the thing that you love doing the most?
The thing I love doing the most is sort of winning new clients. That's my favorite. And the strategy aspect. When I say winning new clients, I really mean the sort of like initial phases of the client conversation. So securing a new client, but talking to them in depth about their strategy, goals, sort of for want of a better word, like sorting them out. So it's sort of like, they come to me like this, and we're like, okay, we're going to organize that, we're going to organize that, we're going to organize that, and it's all going to be neat and tidy. And that's the bit I love. That's the bit I really love. And so, it's organizing their legals. Yeah.
And what does success look like for you?
I guess success would be that house law was still operating. We've been going for 4 years, but I don't really count the first year because it was COVID, and I had 3 children under the age of 2, and I didn't have any help. And so I had one client.
I think that's fair enough. Fair enough.
It was a nappy company, great nappies. And that's one where I'd actually use those nappies for my kids. I was like, I really want to work with them. And they were my first client, and I was really proud. That was like a really big thing for me because I set up house law with the intention of like, look, that's it. I want to work with that company. And then they came off in that first summer, and that was really cool. But I think just to sort of still be growing the revenue of the business, being able to take on some more people. That's probably success, just to keep going, because it's really easy, I think, with these things. I think if you don't grow, you die. That's my philosophy.
I'm with you. It's like, I mean, I hate the analogy, but it's like sharks. You have to keep moving forward or you just die because,
you have to.
it's
Yeah,
because otherwise, what's the point? Like, it just feels
yeah,
so stagnant, right?
yeah. Exactly. So I think that would probably be, yeah. Yeah, and to keep providing really good service, and I think to focus on that and not take that bit for granted, it's really important.
Yeah, that's really nice. Well, we always end the pods with some quick fire questions just to keep you on your toes.
Yeah.
So if House Law had a mascot, what would it be and why?
A mascot.
Yeah.
Does it have to be an animal?
It can be whatever you like. One person actually used their son, so we can use your own kid.
It's probably quite a good one, actually.
Yeah.
A mascot would probably be, I don't know, my dogs, just because they're always around and they often pop up in the back of the thing, and they're kind of what households about being able to work at home. So.
I love it. And let's see. What's your favorite thing about your job? We might have already asked this question, but I like this one.
The favorite thing is the clients.
It's the clients. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's your favorite word?
I don't even know where to start with that one. I don't know. What's your favorite word?
My favorite word used to be ruminate.
Ooh, I like it.
Yeah, but I haven't really, I mean, it's still one of my most favorite words, but I haven't really found a replacement yet for it. I'm like less on it these days.
I think is a great word. I always say I think. But I think is a great word because I think. But to start a sentence with I think is really important because it sort of leaves room, I guess, for not knowing the answer for sure.
Yeah.
And I don't think enough people leave room for, I always feel security in someone. If I'm talking to someone and they go, oh, I'm not sure, I need to look into that a bit more. That makes me feel so much more secure in that person's knowledge because they have this sort of humility and ability to sort of recognize that there's more to know. And I think that's really nice.
That's fabulous answer. I love that. Well, so if people want to follow you or want to learn more, where do they find you in the interwebs?
So houselaw.co.uk is probably your best place. So houselaw.co.uk, and then there's Instagram, and you can email me. But yeah, if you go to the website, you'll probably best launch pad probably.
Great. Daisy, thank you so much. This has been so much fun, as always, to hang out and chat with you.
I hope that was okay. It all makes sense. But yeah, amazing. Thank you for having me. It was great fun.
Pleasure. Thanks again to Daisy for her time and her energy. I love her passion for protecting creative and intellectual property. And having someone like her on your team is truly gold for any business who wants to protect their brand. Once again, if you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe, share with a friend, all those sort of things so you can be notified about new conversations. See you in the new year. Until then, be well. Understories was produced by Cloudfields and Kieran Fowler. The music is by Aves and the branding is by Joe Jones.